Hello, a very warm welcome. My name is Carolyn Kissane, and I serve as the Academic Director here at the Center for Global Affairs, where we have two master's programs, an MS in Global Affairs and an MS in Global Security, Conflict, and Cybercrime. We also host a number of fantastic professional pathway programs, as well as certificate programs. And some of those programs you're going to be learning more about today. But today we are here to talk about careers in humanitarian assistance, and really delighted to have four fantastic CGA alumni returning to our Zoom room for today's conversation. And we have two alums from the class of 2012 and two from the class of 2019, and really very grateful to the four of them for being with us today. And we encourage everyone in the audience to reach out with questions. You can use the Q&A function. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And again, this is an opportunity to dive into a discussion about what do careers in the humanitarian affairs space look like. And this is also connected to one of our concentrations, which is international development and humanitarian assistance. So let me introduce you to our four panelists. So we have Joy Galvez. Joy is a senior program manager for the UN Office of Project Services. And Joy is joining us from the Philippines, where she just arrived. She also was serving in Afghanistan, and she was evacuated, but really very, very challenging time for her and the work that she does. So we'll hopefully be able to talk a little bit more about that in our conversation. But Joy, thank you so much for your service and everything that you've been doing. We have Chris Connolly, also class of 2012, who's an associate director for the Clinton Health Access Initiative. And we have a hard time letting CGA students go. So Chris is also a member of our faculty, and he teaches in the CE and the certificate program, a new certificate program that he has developed in international development. And Chris can tell us more about that, because I think it's a wonderful opportunity for students or prospective students or people who are interested in humanitarian assistance space to explore. And from the class of 2019, we have Julie Mayer. Julie is the MHPSS and Livelihood Integration Officer for IOM, UN Migration, which is the International Organization of Migration. And Julie is joining us from Erbil, Iraq. And she was just before starting our official event, she was telling us how the situation has been rather tenuous since the election 2 weeks ago. So Julie, thank you so much for joining us. And Michelle Dolinar. Michelle is emergency management specialist with FEMA. And Michelle, I think you're joining us from New York, but many thanks to the four of you for coming here today into our Zoom room, and I'm really excited to learn more about what you're doing, and also to help anyone that's joining today to better understand career pathways and how they can best prepare. So why don't we jump in? So Joy, let's start with you. Can you tell us about what you are currently doing and how you got involved in the field of humanitarian assistance?
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, everyone, and welcome to those who are joining us today. Well, my journey in the humanitarian and development sector started about a little more than 20 years ago when I worked with NGOs in the Philippines, and that progressed into getting involved with the Asian Development Bank, Multilateral Development Bank, World Bank, and now the UN. So at the moment, I'm the program manager for a multi-million-dollar project that is funded by NATO for UNOPS, and we do support the security defenses in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, after the fall of Afghanistan and the Taliban is now in government, our program will eventually stop first of all, there is no legitimacy yet in the country. So we're just scrambling to support our staff at the moment. But yeah, 20 years ago, relentless perseverance to get to where I am at the moment. And CGA actually played a really good part of that progression in my career.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Well, I'm going to definitely kind of ask you more questions about some of the specifics of the CGA and also what you're sort of seeing on the ground. But Chris, what do you tell us about your work right now and how you got involved in the humanitarian assistance space?
Sure, thanks, and great meeting everyone. Yeah, so I currently work for the Clinton Health Access Initiative. So we really aim to bring in new, innovative health products to lower and middle income countries. So we work with manufacturers to reduce prices, with host country governments to sort of understand the demand and ensure that there's a pathway in place for market entry of those different products, and also working in the supply chain and connecting the suppliers with the consumer, which has its own challenges in the resource limited settings that we work. So I've been doing a lot of work in COVID-19. Obviously, that's a big disease area right now, doing a lot of work in bringing diagnostic products for COVID-19 into Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So yeah, I mean, I got into this work coming out of CGA. Prior to CGA and getting my master's at CGA, I worked in the private sector briefly, but then went into the Peace Corps. And that sort of made me really want to get involved in international development and led me to CGA. And then after graduating from CGA, I went back to the Peace Corps, and actually did a very short-term assignment with something called Peace Corps Response, and that was to sort of get me to Africa. Africa was my geographic scope, and I was just lasered in on going to Africa, which I really started to take interest in, especially during my time at CGA. And it also got me involved in the health sector in Malawi in Africa. I went there doing the HIV strategy. And so sort of coming in, doing HIV strategy, I had a natural pivot into working for the Clinton Health Access Initiative in Malawi, where I lived for 4 years. And then I lived in Sierra Leone for a while. And now I'm back in the States, still working for CHI, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, globally, covering countries, as I mentioned, in Africa, Latin America, and Asia.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much. All right. So I have the same questions for Julie and for Michelle. So Julie, why don't you go next? We can hear you.
Is it better now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I was just saying thank you for the invitation and hello to everyone. I'm currently in Iraq working with IUM Iraq, managing the implementation of several mental health and psychosocial support programs that we're integrating into livelihood projects. And for me, before joining the CGA, I was with IUM working on the Syria response out of Gaziantep. And I realized there that I would need a master's program in order to, remain competitive in this field that is just very competitive, which is humanitarian assistance. And so I looked for a graduate program that would have a lot of high-level theoretical courses, but also I was specifically looking for practical courses to really build my project management skills. And so that's how I ended up at the CGA, which was really great because I had 2 years to really build the skills that I need for my work today. And in addition to having worked with IUM, I've also worked in humanitarian advocacy with Save the Children in New York, and also with UNHCR.
Wonderful. It's so nice to see you again. Thanks for being with us. Michelle?
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and nice to meet everyone on the call. So as Carolyn had said, I am the Continuous Improvement Coordinator with FEMA Region 2, and FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So Region 2 covers New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands. The past 2 years have been heavily COVID related. FEMA was opening and operating a bunch of community vaccination centers. A majority of those were in New York and New Jersey, but we did have a few down in the Virgin Islands as well. So I write after action reports for Region 2. So I interview responders from FEMA and other federal agencies and document any lessons learned and corrective actions that need to be taken to help improve the way we do business. I got involved, I guess, in humanitarian assistance through the Peace Corps as well. Served in South Africa from 2015 to 2017 as an education volunteer. And then when I finished that up, I immediately wanted to go to grad school, found CGA, was a part of the Coverdell Fellowship. And CGA really helped facilitate my entry into FEMA through an internship, which I participated in for about 1.5 years during my graduate studies.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So we're going to shift a little bit just to kind of understand, all 4 of you sort of sit in different spaces within the international development, humanitarian assistance space. What are you seeing in terms of what the space looks like and where it's going, or how you've seen changes in the span of your career? Is I think it's important to see that it's a changing space on many different levels. So I'd love to get your sense in terms of what you're seeing maybe from your own position in your organization, or just sort of more broadly. And Michelle, why don't we go back to you?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest change for me, and I feel like not like an outlier, but emergency management falls into humanitarian assistance in fairly obvious ways, but also is slightly different. And also FEMA is domestic. But the biggest change over the past 2 years has definitely been COVID-19 and the pandemic. FEMA traditionally responds to natural disasters and as well as man-made disasters, so cyber attacks, terrorism domestically. Pandemic and health response is not typically something that FEMA does, but responding to the pandemic has helped FEMA grow and expand its lines of effort, if you will. So we've ended up partnering with other federal agencies that we don't typically partner with, or at least don't partner with very strongly. So HHS has been a huge partner, CDC, over the past 2 years. I think the other thing, like specifically with my program in continuous improvement, there's been a heavy focus on documenting problems without necessarily correcting them. And within the federal government as a whole, and FEMA in particular, there's been a big shift in the past few years to actually implementing and seeing through corrective actions to hopefully create positive change for the agency. So that's been interesting to be a part of.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So Joy, yeah, similar question. And you've been in the field again prior to even joining the CGA, and you've had different positions. I know you were at the Asian Development Bank and now with the United Nations, and you've served in different countries. So curious to also get your take in terms of the types of changes you're seeing.
I think it's important to note that at least in our consideration from my work, both personally and where I work now with UNOPS, we consider there are like 2 main sectors, especially in Afghanistan and a lot of developing countries, is the humanitarian and development sector. I've worked mostly in the development sector, getting involved with climate change, first initially as adaptation, that changed quickly to mitigation and renewable energy, sustainable energy, and then refocus on adaptation, like for example, the banks and then the UN. So that alone in that sector of environmental or climate change or sustainable energy, you can see the swing in changes depending on probably what the focus of the developing countries or the countries that are being helped are on, or global trends. So global trends, whether on the political or on the practical side, heavily influence what goes on in the country on the ground. Specifically with my engagement at the moment, that again reshifted from development to humanitarian on a broader aspect. So a lot of the agencies, the UN agencies that I live with in the compound are quickly trying to change gears and refocus either their programs or their policies or their funding from purely development to humanitarian response because of what's happening now in the country, in Afghanistan. And I think apart from of course, Afghanistan is quite unique because of what happened on August 15. The fall wasn't expected. We were there for the long haul. We were already in discussions with the Taliban because it was inevitable. But the shift in focus and how development interventions and humanitarian interventions change on the ground really depends on either the political situation in the country where you're active or global trends like environmental, for example. So, and I think the key thing for any organization and humanitarian workers and development workers is to have quick thinking and be able to quickly shift because there will always be sort of a mad rush to what's not just what's in trend or where the funding was, but it's basically responding to the needs of the countries where we're working at. So for example, for UNOPS, there was also a global shift to COVID-19 response. So there were many, we've set up a health health cluster managed out of Myanmar just to be able to provide COVID procurement or COVID vaccine or COVID medical support worldwide. I mean, for the Asia region. So it's very fast paced when you're on the ground and immersed in the countries that needing the support. I hope that answers that.
Very much so, and we'll be returning to some of that as well. So thank you. It was a great. Really appreciated the detail. So Julie, you're in Erbil. You're in Iraq. Can you, from your position, what are you seeing? And again, I think, going back to what Joy said, this international development, humanitarian assistance, sometimes they're separate and yet they're deeply connected. So I'm just be curious from your perspective, what you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite interesting because IOM and in Iraq specifically, we're directly implementing our services. So we're not working through civil society organizations or other NGOs. So we're really right there on the ground. And we definitely have this conversation a lot in our MHPSS, Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Program, because initially we were funded to respond in the emergency response. And now we're moving towards an early recovery, post-conflict response going into a development response. And so we're of course looking for other funding streams, and a big part of it too is making the argument that mental health and psychosocial issues will not be addressed just within 1 or 2 years, and there is a lot of protracted displacement. People still cannot return home, so it's kind of an emergency within this very complex post-conflict context that we're in right now. So I think our team is shifting a bit between the emergency response and going more into what can we do in the long term. And a big part of this is integrating our mental health programming into, for example, livelihood projects. So supporting people who are restarting their destroyed businesses, starting new startups, things like that, but also supporting them along the way with mental health and psychosocial support. And then what I really actually like about the work that IOM does here in Iraq is we have a community-based mental health and psychosocial approach. So we are thinking a lot about how can we, month to month, ensure that our response is informed by the people we work with. And so we're very much working on strengthening the positive coping mechanisms that individuals have, but also looking at the family level and at the community level and providing that more wholesome support. But I think it's a really interesting discussion around where are we right now in Iraq. It's definitely in many places still an emergency setting and a deep humanitarian crisis, but of course the donors are shifting. So it's an interesting conversation.
Just as a quick follow, because I see Joy also shaking her head. So the donors are shifting in terms of how they're prioritizing what they fund.
Exactly. And sorry, I have a power cut, so welcome to Iraq on Zoom. But yeah, absolutely. And there is this division. So it's all about seeing where do their preferences and their ideas go. But maybe Joy, you want to elaborate on that.
Maybe just quickly, yeah, Joy, go back to you, and then I'll go to Chris for.
Yeah, I think I'll just go back to what I said earlier about our program being eventually canceled. Because the donors will not agree to supporting the Taliban at the moment. Some countries would, like for example, we're still working with the government of Japan, and Japan is ready. It's ready to restart the programs. We're building the air traffic control tower in Kabul, and we're building roads. But just like what Julie said, the donors have like a big role in the direction of a program, the existence of a program. So unfortunately, I mean, there's always hope that we should not be sort of just doing what the donors want, but reality is, how can you make an impact, or how can you do development work if you don't have the funding? And with that, you have to comply, for example, with requirements of the donors and with the focus or their mandates, basically. So I agree with Julie. It's a bit of a challenge there.
Thank you. So Chris, health, again, the last 2 years have been, a global health crisis. What are you seeing in terms of not just the kind of the immediate presence in the last 2 years, but also going forward in terms of shifts in the landscape?
Yeah, I think I don't think any of us are going to get away without talking about the impact of COVID. And I think obviously health is not immune to that either. And just in, continuing the thought on, shifting donor priorities. I think, pre-COVID and through COVID, one of the key issues in health financing is that it tends to be disease siloed, which means, investments are made in HIV or TB or, some other, usually infectious disease, but some other disease. And it's not necessarily, cross-cutting system strengthening work that cuts across diseases. This is for a variety of reasons, but that's generally how health financing has been set up in developing countries to really focus on those key infectious diseases that afflict those countries. I think COVID in the health space has revealed a lot of opportunities to maybe hopefully shift away from that, from such a disease siloed approach. I think we were able to very rapidly introduce a lot of products into LMICs, largely because the countries that had developed these systems, these cross-cutting systems, had them in place in order to very quickly receive and roll them out. And that was something that took, years, if not decades, to do for HIV and TB and other diseases. So, because of that infrastructure in place, the systems, the know-how on the ground, and globally, all that was leveraged. And I think, I think there will be a lot of building on what's been accomplished with COVID, and sort of applying those lessons learned, and it may result in more sort of cross-cutting in the health sector, in more cross-cutting, systematic, non-disease specific investments as part of what this term has been said a few times, but as part of pandemic preparedness. Which really, pandemic preparedness requires strong systems to quickly identify and address, new pathogens, new infectious diseases that are spreading. So yeah, I mean, I think, hopefully we're moving in that direction where we're moving a little bit away from being so disease siloed and having more of a larger holistic, cross-cutting approach to addressing some of the health issues in these countries.
Thank you. So I'm going to stay with you, Chris. Many who are joining us today are they're inspired by the work that the four of you are doing and are, really looking for like what are the pathways into this space. So what do you see that are the skills that you need? What does your organization look for when hiring? You are teaching, right? You're teaching in the international development humanitarian space through our certificate program. Like what do you highlight are the important skills as well as the knowledge that that a person needs to succeed and thrive?
Yeah, so I work at sort of the nexus of business, public health, and sort of LMICs. Working with governments and across governments and globally. So I think certainly with my organization, and I think with many, the business skills, particularly quantitative skills, are very important. And being able to take quantitative data or whatever it is, or qualitative data, and being able to analyze it and present it in a way that it can actually inform and drive decisions. Very broad, but it's a very important skill to be able to have. And a lot of that comes back to some sort of fundamental business skills as well. I think many of us work in a grant focused world. For better or for worse, sometimes organizations will be grant focused, as is mine. Others might have the luxury of having funding that is not grant focused, which is great. But I think in the most cases, it's grant oriented, which requires a lot of not only grant management, but project management skills. So being able to, understand how the project progresses, the project life cycle, what needs to happen throughout a project, both sort of programmatically, but also financially, I think are skills that are just fundamental to being able to operate in the space. Knowledge, LMIC knowledge, knowing about these countries, knowing what kind of systems they have in these countries, and some of the challenges that exist in those countries. And the history, of course, always helps when you're working in a country to understand where they currently stand. And then of course in my business, public health, so having a public health background, I would say actually it's important, especially for certain roles. I would say that it's not, myself as an example, it's not required. I think other skills, quantitative, project management, business skills, knowledge of LMICs are equally, if not more important. And you can learn, some of the public health stuff as you're on the job. I'll stop there, but those are some on my end.
Great, thank you very much. So Julie, the lights are back on. So let's go to you. And what are the types of skills? Again, you're at IOM, but you've also started your own NGO. So what do you look for when hiring?
Yeah, very similar actually to Chris. It's key here at IOM Iraq to come with project management skills, to know how to read and act on a budget, to know the project cycles. There is not a lot of hand-holding or guidance, and so it's really useful to come already with a few critical skills, and that also includes some monitoring and evaluation experience, reporting experience, of course. And then I think we generally also look for really good coordinators, because often you don't just have one project, you're running multiple projects. I have 7 at the moment, so you need to be able to coordinate, you need to be able to be flexible, and really also still be able to follow the details, and specifically these project management details and the budgetary details, because it's quite a lot of responsibility that you'll have. So I think definitely it's a great use of time to, while you're at the CGA, to really hone in on exactly these skills, because that's what you'll have to do if you're interested to work with an organization like IOM in the field or even in New York.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So Joy, over to you. Skills, knowledge that are important when hiring?
Well, Chris and Julie actually mentioned already the project management skills. If I could give advice, and if I could talk to myself last year when I took on this job, I would advise everyone and myself to take a PRINCE or Project in Controlled Environment course and MSP, Managing Successful Programs. They do help. They're on the theoretical side, but they do help provide you structure, especially because COVID really impacted on onboarding for UNOPS, like briefings for new staff. And I was like literally no experience with UNOPS, and they have a different system of doing things. They're heavily reliant on PRINCE and MSP methodologies. So that would be very, very useful. And as a good note, of course, UNOPS is actively pursuing more women or gender parity. This is across the UN, but UNOPS, I think, in the last year has been more aggressive in recruiting women. No required experience with UNOPS, but if you want to get ahead, if you can take up all those courses that would give you an edge on understanding the language and the methodologies that these organizations use, that would be great.
Yes, there's a lot of acronyms, right? There are a lot of,
yes. So PRINCE is like project
taxonomy.
Yeah, PRINCE is like projects in controlled environments. So that's like from startup to product delivery to M&E and feedback loop. MSP is almost the same, but elevated into a program level. Because I did have a problem because I was managing at first only 39 projects with 2 PMs or project managers. And then it escalated within 6 months to 110 projects, 9 project managers that I'm managing, plus teams of finance, procurement, and support services. So it's a bit staggering, and not to have that background, it was really extra challenging. So if you want to make your life a little bit easier, if you want to get into project management field, those two are helpful.
Excellent advice. Great suggestion. Thank you. Michelle, over to you. What are you seeing at FEMA, and what are you seeing in terms of around sort of hiring decisions and the different skills, knowledge that are required or looked for?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to repeat what Joy and Chris and Julie said, but project management skills as well as like technical analytical skills are highly sought after right now. I won't, be a broken record and say it all again, but if I could talk about some soft skills that you should have: flexibility and adaptability. And I'm sure everyone on the call can agree. With FEMA in particular, whether you come in human resources or in individual assistance or in like the office of the regional administrator, everyone is subject to deployment in what we call austere conditions. So you could be deploying to Puerto Rico after a magnitude 8 earthquake, or to the Midwest after, severe spring flooding. So, and it can be at the drop of a hat. So flexibility in your personal life is key. And then adaptability, because often we're doing this work underfunded, understaffed, undertrained. So the ability to jump in and wear multiple hats is a huge asset.
I would agree. Generally, it's even working in academia. Those are very important skills to have. So I'm going to stay with you, Michelle. So 2 years ago, you graduated from the CGA. Any specific experiences or classes that really stood out that you feel were pivotal, important to where you are today?
Oh God. So I loved all my classes at CGA.
Good
I would
answer, Michelle. Good answer.
I was in the human rights and international law concentration. So all of my like law classes were amazing. If I could continue to take them and had the time to take them, I would. Um, the field intensives, I did 2 of those during my time at CGA. And I think that those were probably the most beneficial to what I'm doing now. I mean, obviously all of them are beneficial while I'm not practicing, human rights or international law in like my day-to-day work. The research and technical writing skills have been so beneficial. I write probably up to like 8 hours a week, technical documents. So just being able to like prioritize and like write in a clear fashion was definitely developed on those global field intensives, because we would be out there, I'd be working on my papers while traveling around, the countryside of Rwanda. So if you can take one, I would definitely take a global field intensive.
You did Rwanda and Abu Dhabi, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Very good. Yeah. Well, we had to take a pause since of course during COVID, and we are hoping, we think we're looking at running 2 the late spring, early summer. So fingers crossed, Abu Dhabi being hopefully one of them. Thank you. Joy, 2012, going back there, right? A little bit. So any kind of standout experiences or classes or, yeah.
This is the question that I feared the most, because I think I've hit my head too many times. But what stands out to me, I think that sort of shifted my thinking generally, not specifically from any course, was my class in international relations. I guess it's just a change in mindset, finding out who I was in that class, which is weird to hear, but I sort of putting like theory and words into what I already was as a person, and how I make decisions. And to me, that came in handy in all, like, especially this engagement with UNOPS. I remember IR because it's the realist, the realist philosophers, the Prince especially. You have to have that sort of detachment from. I know we're in the humanitarian field. You can have empathy. You can feel. You can have ideals and help, but when you get to a position, especially where I was, which was really managing a whole lot of people and a whole lot of projects and making tough decisions. I remember that closely, be loved by your subjects, but also be tough, and because you need to make those hard decisions. And I think that helped me a lot, that clarity from that class. Everything else helped, but to me that stood out, and it always like sort of reverberates like Hobbes and Machiavelli in my mind, and I really enjoyed that class very much, and it reflects on how I do things and how I manage projects and people now.
Oh, I love that. That's great, because it's one of our core classes, right? So sometimes
Yes.
it's like, oh no, I have to take IR, I have to take IPE, I have to take these classes. But it's so many students do say that those foundational courses are really important and stay with them. So nice to hear that it's has been the case for you as well. Julie.
Yes, I remember taking IR with you, Carolyn, and it was fantastic.
That was a fun group. You were really
Yeah, it was so special. But it's interesting what Joy said, because I think I also had a change in mindset moment or class. And for me, it was Tom Hill's peace building course. And I was in the humanitarian assistance and international development concentration, and also working closely with Jens throughout the 2 years. But I always knew I had to take this peace building class. But it was completely new to me, new concepts, and it was really, really informative and challenging for me. And we had this one assignment where we had to write a paper on something to do with peace building, and I just couldn't find a topic, and it was very hard for me, and I really struggled what to do. But I researched really hard on what I would want to write about and what would also be meaningful for both the humanitarian field and the peace building field. So it was actually then that I first did my first steps into researching mental health and psychosocial support, which is what I'm working in now, and integrating that into peace building programs. And I got really hooked, and I've never stopped the research since that class. And I also really enjoyed how the class challenged my thinking, and it's still in my head today. And as I am here doing the humanitarian work I do, I keep questioning what I'm doing, and I keep going back to the notes from the class. So it was definitely a change in mindset class and very meaningful for me. But also, as I said before, the technical courses for me, like M&E, was integral because it was so project focused. You would do your own monitoring and evaluation plans. So yeah,
Well,
lots of memories.
I hope it's okay if I share that with Tom. I know he'll be really happy to hear. So thank you. Chris, and now I would not only want you to answer the question, but I also want you to say a few words about the certificate that you have developed, because there is a question. We have some great questions coming in from our audience, but there is a question about, is there a certificate that would help, provide the skills and the background to get involved in this space?
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about certificate. I guess just in terms of courses at CGA, I think the developing countries in the global economy, that was sort of a big starting course for me. Looking at what some of the problems were in those countries, foreign aid, the debate around foreign aid, which still is a very large debate even today. And then, starting to get into sustainable development, which actually led me to take the sustainable development course. This sort of, the sustainable development course was also, really important. It exposed me to the concept of sustainable development. And this was before the current SDGs, right? So, it was the beginnings of my being exposed to this. And now it's the foundation for the current sustainable development goals, which I'm sure a lot of people know about. And that's, also the foundation for, and this is my segue, the International Development Certificate. So in the certificate, we are looking at, a variety of different sort of thematic areas, as well as cross-cutting areas. Obviously in line with CGA and the MS and the masters, it's an interdisciplinary certificate. It really tries to analyze the interconnectedness of these different issues. So with the certificate program, we have courses that focus on certain areas, including international development generally and humanitarian assistance generally, but then gets down to specific courses on economic growth, on health, on education, international development, on governance, so the politics behind governance and the impact of politics on development, the environment, and then we look at areas that cut across those different key themes that are part of the SDGs. Looking at a course on gender equality, on finance, development finance. So much of what we do is a priority because of the financial mechanisms that are in place. Also looking at human rights as well, and sort of the role and the debate really around human rights and the focus on human rights compared to the focus on the big plan, sustainable development goals, lots of foreign aid going to support those global agendas. So that's my plug for the certificate program. Happy to answer any questions about it, but certainly a way to get a broad understanding of what's going on in international development. It all relates back to the current global agenda of the SDGs. And then, also being able to take electives that allows you to focus on some areas you have the students have the most interest in.
Great. And it is online, right? It's a fully online. Yes.
Fully online, yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to do a very quick lightning round. All right. So these are, and then we're going to go to the audience questions. So best and worst piece of career advice you've received, and a book, a podcast, or in a website you would recommend. Choose one. So Michelle, why don't you go first? So 2 questions, put them together, put your answers together. Best and or worst career advice, and a book, podcast, or website you recommend to those in the audience.
Oh God. So definitely the podcast I would recommend is Pod Save the World. It's amazing. Best and or worst career advice. Honestly, I try not to listen to people's advice because I don't like giving or taking advice because everyone's just so different. I feel like advice is somewhat pointless. This is a bit FEMA specific though. The worst advice I've ever received is to join the individual assistance cadre. It is a cadre of people who deploy to facilitate the individual assistance program, which consists of like housing, financial grants, as well as other services. And it's a great program, but it's very high stakes and high pressure. And I don't need to add that to my already growing plate of work.
But you already did join, right?
Well, I'm in a different cadre of like employees who deploy. So didn't join IA, but joined another one.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Joy?
Best and worst piece of advice, don't play politics.
Is that the best or the worst?
Both actually, because if you play politics, you can get ahead, stay longer, get what you need. But if you don't, you get left out. It's just double-edged sword, just politics in general. And that's something that I don't know how to navigate still, because people are different times. Book, podcasts, websites. Unfortunately, the last year, especially with UNOPS and in Afghanistan, I have not had the opportunity, but I would go back to something similar to IR that is helping me in my job. And going back to it is Soft Skill, which is it's a very childish book, I guess, but it's all I really need to know. I learned in kindergarten because those are basic soft skills. And people are all the same, whether they're children, they're adults, they're generals to an army or a president. It's the same basic people skills that you need to have, and also a basic understanding of humanity and humans.
Thank you. I love that. That's great. I have that book. I'm gonna have to open it up again. It's been a while. Thank you.
Yeah, say please and thank you. That's what I learned.
Chris?
Sure. Career advice. Maybe I'll combine the two. I would say, academically for the students, I think, doing what interests you, which to me was always, there's so many, at CGA and with the MSGA, there's so many great courses to do, but make sure you're not only covering your knowledge but also the skills. So be sure to take the time to take classes on those skills, whether they're hard or soft skills, and I would actually do that by looking at job descriptions that you're interested in and making sure that you are covering those skills in your academics to make you more competitive. Book or podcast, the book Pathologies of Power comes to mind, by Paul Farmer. So this book looks at the importance of human rights and how they're important to health, but also broader development, which again is the human rights as the main driver of development is a key theme. I think consistently throughout development and in the certificate and MSGA programs.
Great, thank you. Julie?
In terms of advice, I would say someone once told me, know what you want, but also more importantly, know why. And I think it works really well if you're interested in field work, please know why. And I think it is really important to know what you want or to be on a path to find out. But that really helped me, and I think about that even today a lot. And I think it's good to keep asking yourself questions and challenge yourself and what you're doing and what you're working on. I think at some point I was receiving a lot of advice that I should specialize. And I think this is great if you're, becoming a doctor or I don't know. But in the humanitarian field, I think it can really go both ways. We have really important specialized staff and they're essential, but we also have more generalist staff who work on the reporting and in these areas. So I think it's either way. I just was really confused at one point because I kept hearing from people just specialize. But I really think it goes back to knowing what you want and what works for you, and then building your own path around that. And I'm going to go with podcast. I know, Carolyn, in one of the IR classes, you recommended Global Dispatches, and I still listen to it today. It's really great. And I would also recommend if people on the call are interested in mental health and psychosocial support work in the field, do listen in to Heartbeat of Humanity. It's by the IFRC Psychosocial Center, and it's really interesting. They talk to experts, people working in the field, whether it's on mental health and psychosocial support and climate change or the different responses in Africa or the Middle East. It's really interesting, very practical, and you really hear from practitioners.
Excellent, thank you. So we have some really nice questions coming in. So I'm going to combine two, and whoever, raise your hand if you'd like to answer it. It sounds like the majority of you have significant experience on the ground working with these issues. What advice would you give to an early career professional interested in the policy side of humanitarian action? How vital is it to have that experience on the ground? And then kind of a question that connects with that is work experience in local settings important before joining an international organization? So who would like to take one or both? Julie.
Thank you. These are really good questions. And maybe I should have mentioned that in the skills question. But definitely for work with IOM Iraq, for example, it's key to have some field experience. And it doesn't have to be an officer role or anything like that, but even volunteering with your local community, with a refugee organization where you live now, or internships, that's all fine. I think it's really important, if you do want to work in the field and stay in the field, to be committed to doing some on the ground work. And I mean, I started as a volunteer in Lesbos, Greece, and you just have to kind of be okay putting in volunteer time, but it's a really incredible experience, and I think it will really help finding employment later on if you're interested in field work.
Great. We have Joy as well.
Yeah, I'm going to add to what Julie said. Also, don't be afraid, and if you can afford it, seek out actually difficult assignments and hardship duty stations, especially if you want to progress to policies. For example, the policy side, it is very useful to see work on the ground to build that, because there's always this natural sort of headbutting between policy and on the ground practical and practice or implementation. And normally they don't see eye to eye, because one does not go into the policy side and the other doesn't go into the on the ground implementation side. So, but any which way, whether you go into policy or full-time field work, I think just seeking out, or at least being open to hardship duty stations, would really build a lot of your skills, and also both hard and soft, because they will be challenging.
Excellent. All right. So we have a couple more questions. Thank you for all your expertise and time with the IGOs, NGOs, nonprofits, aiding in important initiatives, projects across the globe. What key areas of improvement within the communication delivery to public awareness could be established at this time? Michelle?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that I'm understanding correctly. This is specifically about areas of improvement within communication and like public messaging, correct?
That's how I read it, but yeah, that's how I read the question.
Okay. I mean, from the FEMA perspective, and I'm sure this applies, you know, somewhat across the board, accessibility is a huge issue that we're focusing on right now. So not only with, you know, changing public advertisements into various languages. So in Puerto Rico, ensuring that things are communicated in Spanish, but also ensuring that they're communicated in multiple media ways. So not just on television, but in the newspaper. You know, one thing that they do down in the Caribbean is using cars with like megaphones to drive around to rural communities. So making sure that that message is getting out to everyone, all sectors of the population, not just sectors that have access to the internet or television.
Great, thank you. So we have another question. What are the opportunities for professional community organizers in the international humanitarian aid assistance space? How can we search for internships or opportunities to learn by doing along with college? So I guess the students probably in college is seeking to get more involved.
I can maybe try to answer that. I you know, in the health sector, there's a lot of work around ensuring community involvement, community-driven work. We call it patient-centric approach. A big part of that is working with civil society, Dr. Carolyn, which I took your course in that. But
that's really taking me back. I haven't taught that probably since you left the CGA.
You know, definitely growing, or you know, huge trend right now is working with civil society, and the idea is that having a community-driven intervention is you understand what the needs are in those communities, and not only that, but the community is part of the development of the project and the implementation of the project and the monitoring of the project, and ultimately that results in you know, the sustainability of the project and the investment. So I think there is a lot of space there. I would look for things like civil society. USAID does a lot of civil society work, many other organizations as well. So I think if, you know, most bilateral donors, meaning government to government donors, most governments will have a civil society component to it, and that those are certainly places to start to look at when you're talking about that type of work.
Great. We have one last question. How do we include these hard and soft skills on a CV and cover letters when applying for jobs? You want to take that one? Best way to show the hard and the soft skills in a cover letter and or your CV. Joy?
I had a lesson from my friend who works for the UNSCAP, the social, economic and social something in Bangkok. He helped me apply for a job, and he said, he is a screener. So he said, the CV, it's always pro forma. Usually you go into the system of whatever UN agency, they have their own system, they have their own taleo, blah, blah, blah. You complete that, that's where your hard skills go. But what he said was the cover letter is important. I was guilty of not paying attention to my cover letter because I thought the focus would be the CV. But he said, and I thought I would have to keep it. These are misconceptions on my part, that I have to keep it to one page. But he was a screener and for the UN, and he was saying, no, there's no page limit to a cover letter, and you have to put everything that you think responds to every bullet point in the job advert, in the job description, in the TOR. Respond to each bullet and highlight what you actually did or contributed to, for example, the success of an activity or a project, et cetera, et cetera. So he said, very specific, put your soft and hard skills there, but because not to discourage you, but he said, no one really goes into the CV point by point. They would rather read it from the cover letter. Maybe that's just one UN agency. Maybe other UN agencies don't do that. But it was good, because after that, and I got this job. I applied for this job in April in the middle of the pandemic, and it was very, very quick. And because I followed his advice on that, and it doesn't hurt to follow that advice, to put all the specifics, especially the soft skills, in the cover letter.
It's great. Thank you. It's excellent. No, it's wonderful. And you took advice that you had received, applied it, and found it to be a successful move. Great. Julie?
Yes, no, just coming from another UN agency, I think I completely agree. And I would actually recommend everyone to be very careful about what they enter in the online system, because that's what's going to make or break it for you. And if something in there you click that doesn't apply to the job, you'll be moved from the list automatically. So be careful filling out these forms, because only later they might look at your CV or your cover letter, if at all. So I think filling that out very carefully is important, and look at the specific things that the job requires, and then make sure you hit those marks if you're eligible. But that's key, and I think it's good advice about the CV. And I think at IUM they don't even really look at the cover letter. So I think it also depends, from country to country or mission to mission. But always have a nice one written, of course, with many examples of your hard and soft skills and experience.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank all of you so much for joining us. I want to thank everyone in the audience who took the time to join us today, and a very, very special thank you to Julie, to Michelle, to Joy, and to Chris. Grateful for your time, grateful to coming back right into the CGA Zoom room, but always a delight to see the four of you. And yeah, and I just want to commend you all for the amazing work that you're doing. You didn't choose easy paths, but you're making very significant, tremendous contributions to the populations you work with. So thank you. And please, everyone, take care, stay safe, and we'll be doing our next career event probably in December, and then we'll be doing 2 more in the spring. So be on the lookout. We have a number of great events that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. So check out the CGA events calendar. And again, thank you all so much for joining us. Okay, bye, everyone.